Welcome back to Real Estate Mindset. Today's video is going to be absolutely bonkers. Now, the data is in, and the US dollar has lost 96% of its value since it was created. Now, it's really important to understand what's going on right now with the US dollar, especially because the world, many parts of the world, are making pushes to de-globalize the US dollar. But the reality is the US dollar has almost never been as dominant as it is right now. So what exactly can even replace the dollar? Some have suspected the new Federal Reserve payment system called FedNow will actually start to replace the dollar. Now, CBDC, or centralized banking digital currency, is a concern of many. But regardless, you guys, we're going to jump into all of those things today. We're going to look at the history of the dollar and look at where we're at on the global stage. And remember, I'm not a financial advisor, even though my bio is as a realtor, loan officer, and instructor in real estate in Texas. And if you guys can, please like this video, subscribe if you haven't already, shoot me a comment below. But either way, let's dig into the US dollar. Now, above shows how the value of the US dollar has lost more than 96% of its purchasing power since the creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913. Consumer prices have gone up more than 24 times since 1913, meaning that a $1 bill from 1913 would have less than 4 cents in purchasing power today. And this picture here really shows the deterioration of the dollar over a period of time. This is really remarkable if you consider that the dollar has lost 96%, yet it is still by far the most dominant world currency available. And let me kind of go into the last 100 years of the US dollar dominance. Timeline of dollar dominance. In the 1920s, the dollar began to replace pound sterling as an international reserve currency after the First World War. The United States is a significant recipient of wartime gold inflow. So obviously the dollar started by being backed by gold. Now, obviously that changed, but again, the dollar's dominance started with gold as a backing. Now, 1944, international trade is conducted using the US dollar under the Bretton Woods Agreement. So fast forwarding to 1960, the demand for the dollar really explodes. European and Japanese exports become more competitive with US exports. There is a large supply of dollars around the world, making it difficult to back dollars with gold. So the things that were going on in the 1960s is what really prompted President Nixon to cease the direct convertibility of US dollars to gold. Now that happened in 1971. Moving on to 1981, after years of hyperinflation, the US dollar loses two-thirds of its purchasing power. So in the 1980s, early 1980s, it took a massive hit. Actually, between the 60s and the 80s, it took a massive hit as far as purchasing power. So really important to kind of understand what happened. Now, when we fast forward to 2007 and 2008, during the global financial crisis, investors seek US dollars, expecting the currency to retain its value. So very popular. The dominance is shown. A lot of people want the dollar. And we saw that during 2007 and 2008. But here's where things really start going bad for the dollar as far as a global currency. Now, following the annexation in 2014, Russia prioritizes de-dollarization in response to Western sanctions. So 2014 was really the pivoting point when big superpowers across the globe started to make moves to veer away from the dollar. It's really interesting to see this. Now, fast forward to 2022, central banks buy gold at the fastest pace since 1967 as countries diversify their reserves away from the dollar. The war in Ukraine results in Western sanctions again against Russia. As a result, Russia and China deepen cooperation between their financial systems, with ruble yuan trade increasing 80 times in 8 months. It's really hard to pronounce Chinese currency. It's yuan. Okay, so it's pronounced yuan. yuan, the Chinese yuan. So we're seeing China and Russia make a huge push in 2022, as well as other central banks. That's why they're buying gold. They want to essentially make a new currency that's collateralized by gold. Now, fast forward to 2023, Brazil and Argentina discussed the creation of a common currency. The UAE and India explore the use of rupees to trade non-oil commodities. Russia and Iran are working together to launch a cryptocurrency backed by gold. Now, despite these moves, few expect to see the end of the dollar's global sovereign status anytime soon. Currently, central banks still hold about 60% of the foreign exchange reserves in dollars. So reflecting on that, we can clearly see the last 100 years of the dollar's dominance. And we can also clearly understand that right now, the dollar still has a tremendous amount of dominance around the world. But what we're also seeing is large parts of the world make moves to get away from the dollar. And they've been working on that for the last decade at least. So although it still seems unrealistic, because again, what could even replace the dollar? The dollar is so dominant. Now, just to show y'all how dominant the dollar is, let's take a look at the US dollar exchange rate over the last 22 years and compare it to 7 other indexes. So US dollar exchange rate, this is from first quarter of 2021 to second quarter of 2022. And here's really what I want to point out. Now, we can see in the last 20 years, the low as far as the dominance of the dollar was in Q3 of 2011. And you can see the euro was doing pretty good when compared to the dollar, the Japanese yen, the Canadian dollar, a lot of other currencies were doing good when stacked against the US dollar, probably because during that time the US was in deep financial trouble. Now, if we fast forward to Q3 of 2012, that's when the US dollar surged and skyrocketed as far as dominance on the world stage once again. Now that lasted till about Q3, Q4 of 2015. What's really interesting to note during that skyrocketing and dominance is that's when the sanctions against Russia happened. So very interesting. Now after that, it kind of plateaus and goes sideways until we get to Q4 of 2020. So Q4 of 2020, the dollar dominance yet again skyrockets. So I understand we've lost 96% of our value. All of these other countries are making a push to get away from the dollar, and all of that's bad. But again, I say, what could possibly replace the US dollar? But nevertheless, it's important to understand and kind of see what people are trying to do, right? What is potentially coming for us? So let's go into a little bit more nitty gritty of what's been happening with the dollar the last few months. The US dollar rose more than 7.5% in 2022, according to the Wall Street Journal Dollar Index, but some think the dollar's lofty rally might be over. So what's going on and what can we expect in 2023? After rallying for most of 2022, the dollar's value relative to other currencies has dipped over the past few months. That's probably due to the prospect of the US economy weakening. So the fact that the US might do a little worse than earlier anticipated, Europe and Japan might do a little bit better than earlier anticipated, is enough to drive the value of the dollar down. They see a turning of inflation problem in the US, but there's less evidence of that in Europe and England, so those banks at this point seem much more hawkish than the Fed. If there's any foreseeable end to the conflict in Ukraine, that would bolster the euro's value significantly, which could relatively decrease the dollar's value even further. It's kind of clear that the world wants the dollar's value weakened for their own economy, especially if they have US sanctions. And this is a quote from Donald Trump. This could very well lead under the Biden's administration leadership to an all-out nuclear World War III happening. That sounds crazy, but this is from Donald Trump. We're not very far away from it. Believe it or not, Trump said, in an apparent reference to Russia, which has recently announced that it will station tactical nuclear weapons. Our economy is crashing. Inflation is out of control. Russia has joined with China. Can you believe that? Saudi Arabia has joined with Iran. Adding that China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea have come together as a menacing and destructive coalition. China recently brokered a peace deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Beijing is also deepening its relationships with Moscow as they both are opposed to the US-led global order. Russia has already adopted the Chinese yuan as one of the main currencies for its international reserves and overseas trade in the face of Western sanctions. Chinese yuan has replaced the US dollar as the most traded currency in Russia, Bloomberg reported on Monday. The yuan surpassed the dollar in monthly trading volume in February for the first time, and the difference became more pronounced in March, the report said, citing data from daily transaction reports from Moscow Exchange. Last month, the government said the RBI has allowed banks from 18 companies to trade in the rupee, recently noted in the rupee, or India's currency. One could see how the Indian rupee could become a vehicle currency for some of the trade that India does with the rest of the world, especially South-South trade. It could be a unit of account, it could be a means of payment, and it could become a store of value. And there's a group of these nations getting together to do that called BRICS. Let me show you the members of BRICS right now. The BRICS Alliance is exploring the idea of an innovative currency and plans to share proposals at an upcoming summit in South Africa that happens in August. BRICS is an acronym standing for 5 leading emerging economies: Brazil, Russia, and India, China, and South Africa. The plan will initially transition from using domestic currencies in transactions to introducing and circulating a digital or alternative form of groundbreaking currency in the near future. And again, that summit is scheduled for August of this year. So they continue to try. Now, my position is it's still really hard for me to believe that anything can replace the dollar. So I'm wondering, will FedNow replace the dollar? It's possible. Take a look at where we're at with FedNow. Long-awaited Fed digital payment system to launch this July. FedNow, the Federal Reserve's digital payment system, will debut in July. A lot of people are freaked out about this because of privacy, the government's ability to, turn your money off. And the reality is it is a little bit scary, especially with privacy and control, right? And basically being desensitized to our rights. The Federal Reserve digital payment system, which it promises will help speed up the way money moves, will debut in July. The system will allow bill payments, money transfers such as paychecks and distributions from the government, as well as a host of other consumer activities to move more rapidly at a lower cost, according to the program's goals. Right? That's a goal. I mean, I have a goal to make $10 million in 1 week, right? That's my goal. So invest in me. You see what it's just a goal. Kind of funny. We urge financial institutions and their industry partners to move full steam ahead with preparations to join the FedNow service. Institutions that participate in the program will have 7-day, 24-hour access as opposed to a system currently in place that closes on the weekends. So that's what's going on around the world. Do me a favor, y'all. I'm going to stick to real estate. I just briefly went out of real estate. Don't hate me for that. Like the video, please, guys. Just like the video. This was hard to do, but I want to ask you, what do y'all think is going to happen with the US dollar? I believe it's probably going to continue to take a hit because it can afford to. I think that will continue to happen. I believe one way or the other, we are going to have a push to digital currency. I don't know when that's going to happen. I don't know how it's going to happen, but it looks like that's what's starting to happen. Personally, I don't think anyone's going to trump the US necessarily, but again, I want to hear from you. Let me know what you believe. Comment below. And other than that, if you're out there investing in currency or real estate, I wish you luck and I hope you win.